By the time the county inspector arrived with a demolition notice, Isaiah Mercer had already spent 3 nights standing outside the same locked basement door. The door was only 6 feet wide, painted gray, no sign on it, no warning, no explanation. But behind it, something was making a sound. Not loud, not even constant. Every few minutes, there was a dull metallic tick from somewhere below the concrete floor. The first time Isaiah heard it, he blamed the building. The second time, he blamed the pipes. By the 7th time, he stopped making excuses. He put his hand against the door. The metal was cold, colder than the rest of the building, and that was when Isaiah noticed something he had missed during the entire 3 months he had owned the factory. The lock was new. Everything around it was covered in 30 years of rust. The hinges were rusted. The bolts were rusted. The door frame was rusted, but the padlock looked almost untouched. Someone had replaced it, and someone had wanted whatever was behind that door to stay there. 3 days later, Isaiah cut the lock open. What he found downstairs was not money. It was not weapons. It was not some forgotten laboratory. It was something much harder to understand. 3 enormous steel machines were sitting beneath the factory floor. They were connected by pipes. Each one carried the same faded number, and on the wall behind them, written in black grease pencil, were 4 words. Do not start the third one. To understand why a 42-year-old welder would buy an abandoned factory everyone else considered worthless, you have to go back to the day Isaiah first saw it. It was a Tuesday morning in late November. The factory sat on the edge of a small industrial town in Georgia, behind a row of warehouses and an overgrown railway spur. The sign above the entrance had lost 3 letters. Mercer Industrial Fabrication had once been painted across the front. Now only the word fabrication remained clearly visible. Isaiah had known the building for years. Everyone in town did. People remembered when trucks lined up outside it. They remembered the welding bays glowing orange at night. They remembered workers carrying steel beams through the loading doors. But by the time Isaiah walked through the gate, the factory had been abandoned for 17 years. The windows were broken. The roof leaked. Grass grew through cracks in the loading yard. Inside, the smell of old oil still lingered beneath the dust. Isaiah didn't see a ruin. He saw possibilities. He had been welding since he was 19. His father had taught him how to repair farm equipment before Isaiah was old enough to drive. His father had always said one thing whenever Isaiah wanted to replace something instead of repairing it. First find out why it failed. Isaiah never forgot that sentence. That was also why he walked slowly through the factory. He wasn't looking at what was broken. He was looking at what might still be useful. The auction company had listed the property for $18,000. Almost nobody had shown interest. The roof alone needed more than that. The electrical system was outdated. The machinery had supposedly been removed years earlier, and the county had already warned potential buyers that demolition might eventually be required. Isaiah offered $11,500. The auctioneer laughed. You're the only person who's made an offer. Isaiah looked through the dirty window toward the main workshop. What happens if nobody buys it? They tear it down. How much? The auctioneer shrugged. Whatever the county decides. Isaiah looked again at the building. Then he made the offer. 3 weeks later, the factory belonged to him. People immediately started telling him he had made a mistake. The first person was his cousin Darnell. You bought a dead factory? Isaiah smiled. I bought the land. You bought a headache, maybe. Then came the neighbors. One told him the place was contaminated. Another said the old owner had left because the machinery had caught fire. Someone else claimed there was a basement nobody had entered in decades. Isaiah ignored most of it. Rumors were cheap. Steel wasn't. He spent the first month cleaning the main workshop. He repaired 2 roof sections. He replaced broken window panels. He cleared weeds from the loading yard. He found old welding tables beneath piles of debris and restored 3 of them. Then, one evening, he discovered something strange. At the far end of the building, Behind a collapsed storage rack was a narrow concrete corridor. Isaiah followed it. The corridor ended at a gray metal door. He tried the handle. Locked. He searched the surrounding walls. Nothing. No sign. No blueprint. No mention of a basement. He took a photograph and forgot about it. At least he thought he did. 2 weeks later, while working alone after dark, Isaiah heard the sound. Tick. He stopped welding. Silence. Then again. Tick. He turned off the lights. The factory became completely quiet. Another sound came from beneath him. Tick. Isaiah walked toward the corridor. He stood in front of the gray door. Then he noticed something he had never seen before. Dust had gathered everywhere, except along the bottom edge of the door. There was a narrow, clean line. Something had moved recently. Isaiah crouched down. He touched the concrete. Cold, very cold. And somewhere beneath his boots, something heavy moved. Not enough to shake the building, just enough for Isaiah to hear it. He stood slowly. For the first time since buying the factory, he wondered whether the building had been abandoned for the reason everyone thought. And then he heard the third sound. Tick. But this time, it came from much deeper underground. Isaiah didn't open the door that night. He went home. The next morning, he brought a flashlight, a camera, and a thermocouple thermometer from his welding shop. He told himself he was only checking for a pipe leak. That explanation lasted about 10 minutes. The temperature inside the main workshop was 71 degrees. Near the gray door, it was 68. 3 feet closer, it dropped to 63. Isaiah frowned. He checked the instrument again. The reading was correct. He placed his hand against the door. It was cold enough to feel damp. "That's not normal," he said. The door itself wasn't unusual. Heavy steel, old construction, probably installed when the factory was built. But the padlock was different. Isaiah examined it closely. The lock had almost no corrosion. There were scratches around the keyway. Fresh scratches. He took a photograph. Then he called Darnell. "You ever heard anything about a basement?" Darnell laughed. "You finally found it? You knew?" "I heard there was one." "From who?" "My father." Isaiah paused. "What did he say?" "That nobody used it." "Why?" He didn't know. That answer bothered Isaiah more than it should have. His father had worked around the factory when Isaiah was a child, not inside it, but he had repaired equipment for several of the companies that operated nearby. If there was a basement, someone should have known what was in it. Isaiah searched the county property records. The original building plans were incomplete. The public documents showed the main workshop, office section, loading area, and storage wing. No basement, no underground machinery, nothing. Then he found a second document, a maintenance permit from 1978. It listed an electrical modification beneath the western workshop. Isaiah stared at the paper. There was no western basement on the building plans. He drove to the county office. The clerk found the original permit. The document was faded and partially damaged, but one line remained readable. Subsurface equipment access. Restricted personnel only. Isaiah asked who had signed it. The clerk checked the file. Company engineer. Name. She turned the page. Samuel Bell. Isaiah recognized the name. Samuel Bell had been the factory's chief engineer. He had died more than 20 years earlier. Isaiah returned to the factory that afternoon. He walked through the western workshop again. This time, he looked at the floor. The concrete had been patched in several places. Most patches were rectangular. One was different. It formed a long, narrow shape running parallel to the wall. Isaiah measured it. 23 feet. He measured again. 23 feet exactly. Then he noticed another patch, 8 feet away. Same length. His father had taught him to distrust perfect measurements in old buildings. Old buildings moved. Concrete cracked. Walls shifted. Nothing stayed perfect for 40 years, but these measurements were almost too precise. Isaiah called his friend Marcus, an electrical technician. Marcus came after work. He looked at the floor. "You think there's something underneath?" "I don't know." Marcus smiled. That's usually when you find something. They drilled a small inspection hole through the concrete. The drill went down 6 inches, then stopped. Not on rock. Metal. Marcus pulled the drill back. Isaiah stared at the small hole. That's steel. How deep? Don't know. They drilled another hole 12 inches away. Again, metal. Isaiah measured the distance between the holes. Exactly 4 feet. He walked across the workshop. 4 feet. Another 4 feet. Another. The metal wasn't random. It was arranged in a pattern. Marcus crouched beside the hole. Whatever this is, somebody built it. Isaiah nodded. Then he looked toward the gray door. What if the door isn't the entrance? Marcus followed his eyes. What do you mean? What if the whole floor is the cover? They spent the next 2 days mapping the metal beneath the concrete. The pattern formed a rectangle almost 30 feet long. There were bolts beneath the floor, heavy ones. Not foundation bolts, machine bolts. Isaiah had seen them before. They were used to anchor industrial equipment that produced enormous torque. Marcus looked at the measurements. Whatever was down there was big. How big? Bigger than anything this building needed. That sentence stayed with Isaiah, because if the equipment had been necessary, why had the factory records been incomplete? And if it wasn't necessary, why had someone spent money burying it? 3 days later, Isaiah returned to the gray door with a cutting torch. He hesitated before lighting it. He remembered the old warnings, the rumors, the restricted permit, the fresh lock. Then he cut through the padlock. The metal snapped. The door opened 2 inches. A rush of cold air came through. Not stale air, moving air. Isaiah pulled the door wider. A concrete staircase disappeared into darkness. He shined his flashlight downward. At the bottom was a steel landing, and on that landing was a line of yellow paint. Isaiah took 1 step, then another. Halfway down, he saw the first pipe. It ran along the wall and disappeared beneath the stairs. A second pipe followed it. Then a third. All 3 were connected to something deeper. Isaiah reached the bottom. The room was enormous. Dust covered almost everything, but not the machines. 3 steel cylinders stood in the darkness. Each was nearly 8 feet tall. Each was connected to a network of pipes, and each carried a number stamped into its side. 1, 2, 3. Isaiah moved his flashlight across the wall. There was an old electrical panel, a pressure gauge, a handwritten maintenance chart, and beneath it, a sentence written in black grease pencil. Isaiah stepped closer. He read it once, then again. Do not start the third one. Marcus stood behind him. Neither man spoke, because suddenly the biggest question wasn't why the factory had a basement. It was why someone had gone to so much trouble to make sure nobody ever turned one of those machines on. Isaiah didn't touch machine 3. Instead, he spent the next week trying to understand what he was looking at. The 3 machines looked like pressure vessels, but they weren't simple tanks. Each had a large central shaft, each had external cooling lines, and each connected to the others through a system of pipes that disappeared into the concrete. Marcus brought in another technician. Then Isaiah contacted an elderly mechanical engineer named Leonard Price, who had worked in industrial fabrication for nearly 50 years. Leonard stared at the photographs for several minutes. "Where did you get these?" Isaiah told him. Leonard became quiet. "You shouldn't run them," Isaiah frowned. "You know what they are?" "Not exactly. That isn't what I asked." Leonard looked at machine 3. "That number tells me enough." He explained that some factories in the 1970s experimented with large-scale thermal recovery systems. The machines could capture waste heat from industrial processes and transfer it into another system. But this installation was different. It was much larger and much more complicated. Leonard pointed to the pipes. These weren't just recovering heat. What were they doing? Moving it. To where? Leonard didn't know. That was the problem. Isaiah returned to the basement. He examined the pressure gauges. Machine 1 had a gauge frozen at 0. Machine 2 was also at 0. Machine 3 was different. Its needle sat just above 5. Isaiah photographed it. He checked again the next morning. Still 5. The following morning, 5. That shouldn't have been possible if the machine had been abandoned for 17 years. There was pressure somewhere inside, a tiny amount, but enough to matter, Isaiah told Marcus. They agreed not to open anything. Instead, they followed the pipes. One went through the west wall, another disappeared into the ceiling. The third went downward. Isaiah followed it into a narrow service tunnel. The tunnel ended beneath the loading yard. There was another steel hatch. This one was welded shut. Above it, someone had painted a faded red line. Isaiah photographed it. Then he found something else. A small brass plate. The words were nearly unreadable, but 3 letters remained. Thermal Recovery Unit. Isaiah searched old industrial records. He found references to the company that had operated the factory before it closed. The company had been losing money in the late 1970s. Fuel prices had risen, production had fallen, and according to one newspaper article, the factory had experimented with a system intended to reduce energy costs. The project had failed, or at least that was the official story. The article said the equipment had been removed. Isaiah read that sentence 3 times. Removed, but the machines were still underground. He started looking for Samuel Bell. He found an old photograph in the local historical archive. Samuel stood outside the factory with 6 other engineers. Behind them was a truck. On the truck sat a machine that looked almost identical to Machine 1. Isaiah enlarged the photograph. There was a number painted on its side. 1. He searched the archive again. Then he found a maintenance notebook. Samuel Bell's handwriting filled most of the pages. Most entries were technical: pressure, temperature, flow. But one entry from 1981 caught Isaiah's attention. Unit 1 stable, Unit 2 usable, Unit 3 remains unsafe under continuous load. Isaiah turned the page. The next page had been torn out. He checked the following pages. The entries continued. Then, in 1983, the system works better than projected. Management wants to expand. I have refused. Isaiah stopped. That changed everything. The system hadn't failed. Someone had stopped it. He kept reading. A later entry said, if they restart the 3rd unit without correcting the underground return line, the entire system could overpressure. Isaiah closed the notebook. Now the warning on the wall made sense, but only partly. He still didn't know what the system had actually been connected to. The next clue came from an unlikely place. The town library had old aerial photographs. Isaiah requested images from 1975, 1980, and 1985. The factory looked different in each. In 1975, there were 2 large cylindrical storage tanks behind the building. In 1980, there were 4. By 1985, all of them were gone. Isaiah went outside and looked toward the loading yard. There was nothing there now, just cracked concrete. He measured the distance between the old tank locations. Then he returned downstairs. The pipes from Machine 1 and Machine 2 were aimed directly toward those locations, but Machine 3's pipe went somewhere else. Isaiah followed it to the welded hatch. He scraped away years of paint. Underneath was a second marking, a faded arrow, pointing down. For the first time, Isaiah realized the basement wasn't the mystery. It was only the control room. Whatever the factory had really built was still buried beneath the property, and Machine 3 wasn't protecting the secret. It was protecting the people who might accidentally restart it. Isaiah spent another month investigating before touching anything. He refused to guess. He refused to trust rumors. He wanted evidence. He found the evidence in an old box stored inside the factory office. Inside were invoices from 1979, steel, copper, industrial pumps, specialized valves. and one shipment that had never made sense. 42,000 pounds of heat-resistant piping. The quantity was enormous, too much for the 3 machines downstairs. Isaiah traced the supplier. The company no longer existed, but its records had been transferred to a state archive. There, Isaiah found a diagram. It showed the factory, the basement, the 3 machines, and a network beneath the surrounding land. The system extended almost 300 feet underground. At the far end was a chamber labeled Thermal Storage Vault. Isaiah stared at the diagram. The factory had never simply been recycling waste heat. It had been storing it underground. The system had been designed to absorb enormous amounts of industrial heat during production and slowly release it later. That explained the pipes. It explained the tanks. It explained the pressure. But it didn't explain why the project had been abandoned. The answer came from another document, a safety report dated October 1983. The report identified a structural weakness in the return line connected to Machine 3. If the system operated above a certain pressure, the underground line could rupture. The report recommended shutting the entire system down, but someone had written across the bottom, "Temporary solution. Repair scheduled after production cycle." The repair never happened. The factory closed 2 years later. Isaiah finally understood the strange coldness around the basement door. The system had been designed to move heat. Even after decades, sections of the underground structure were still interacting with the surrounding ground. The mystery was becoming practical, not supernatural, not impossible, just old engineering that had been forgotten. But there was still one question. Why was Machine 3 still pressurized? Isaiah called Leonard. The old engineer came to the factory. He examined the gauge. Then he examined the pipework. His face changed. "Don't open this valve." "Why?" "Because pressure doesn't come from nowhere." They traced the line. It led toward the thermal storage vault. Leonard checked another gauge. Then another. The system wasn't completely dead. It was slowly equalizing pressure. For 17 years the system had been settling, but a recent repair Isaiah had made to the factory's roof drainage system had changed something. Rainwater had been redirected away from one part of the property. That changed groundwater pressure around the buried chamber. The old system had begun responding. The ticking sound wasn't a machine running. It was metal contracting and expanding as underground temperatures shifted. The mystery finally had an explanation, but then Leonard noticed something. The third machine's pressure was rising, slowly. Very slowly, but it was rising. Isaiah checked the gauge. 5. Then 5.5, then 6. What happens if it reaches the old limit? Leonard looked at him. "We don't find out." They needed access to the underground vault. The welded hatch had to be opened. The county inspector arrived the next morning. He had come to inspect the building before approving Isaiah's renovation plans. Instead, he found an underground industrial system that wasn't even listed in the current property records. The county ordered the basement sealed. Isaiah refused. Not because he wanted to run the machines. He wanted to understand them. That afternoon, he brought a cutting crew. They opened the welded hatch. A narrow ladder disappeared into darkness. Isaiah went first. The tunnel smelled like wet concrete and old metal. After 30 feet, it widened. After another 20, they reached a massive chamber. The thermal storage vault was larger than the factory itself. Rows of thick pipes ran along the ceiling. Old insulation hung from them. At the center was a circular steel structure. Isaiah walked around it. Then he saw something scratched into the metal, a date, 1983. Below it were initials, SB, Samuel Bell. Isaiah placed his hand against the steel. It was warm, not hot, but warm. After all those years, then he noticed a second panel. Behind it was a manual shut-off mechanism. Isaiah pulled the cover away. Inside was a handwritten note sealed in plastic. Samuel Bell had written it. The note was short. He explained that the system had worked. far better than management expected. But he had refused to restart Unit 3 because the underground storage chamber had been expanded beyond its original design. The factory wanted more capacity. Samuel believed the structure could not safely handle it. His final line was simple: "If this place ever opens again, don't restart the machine. Repair the system first." Isaiah folded the note carefully. He finally understood. The factory wasn't worthless. It had been an abandoned piece of engineering, waiting for someone patient enough to understand it. But there was one problem. The pressure gauge upstairs had already reached 7, and the original safety limit was 8. Isaiah looked at Leonard. How long? Leonard checked the readings. Maybe 2 days, maybe less. They had to act, but they couldn't simply release the pressure. The system had been sealed for decades. One wrong valve could turn an old engineering project into a serious accident. Isaiah returned upstairs. He looked at Machine 3. For weeks he had wondered what it was hiding. Now he understood. It wasn't hiding the secret. It was holding the secret together. And if Isaiah wanted to save the factory, he would have to repair a system nobody had touched in more than 40 years. Isaiah spent the next 48 hours rebuilding the system one section at a time. He didn't restart Machine 3. He didn't try to force the old equipment to work. Instead, he repaired the part Samuel Bell had warned about, the underground return line. The line had cracked decades earlier. Someone had reinforced it from the outside, but the repair had never been completed. Isaiah and Leonard carefully exposed the damaged section. The steel was thinner than expected. One more pressure cycle might have been enough to break it. They installed a modern pressure relief assembly. Then they replaced 2 sections of the old return pipe. The work took all night. At 4:17 in the morning, Isaiah tightened the final connection. Nobody spoke. He checked every gauge. Machine 1, 0. Machine 2, 0. Machine 3, 7 1/4. The pressure had stopped rising. For the first time since Isaiah discovered the basement, the needle stayed still. Leonard nodded. "Now we can bring it down." Isaiah opened the relief system slowly. A deep vibration moved through the pipes. Then came the sound, that same metallic ticking Isaiah had heard weeks earlier. Only now it was different. It came once, then stopped. The pressure dropped. 7, 6, 5, then 3. Isaiah closed the valve. The system was stable. They had done it, but Isaiah still wasn't finished. He wanted to know whether the old system could actually be useful. So over the next 6 months, he restored the factory. He kept most of the original equipment. He replaced unsafe components. He removed what couldn't be repaired. And he preserved Samuel Bell's notes. The old thermal storage system was never returned to its original industrial purpose. Instead, Isaiah adapted part of it. The underground chamber became a controlled thermal storage system for the renovated workshop. It reduced heating costs during winter. It helped regulate temperatures inside the building. And more importantly, it gave Isaiah a working example of something the town had forgotten. Old engineering could still have value. People who had laughed at him began stopping by. The same neighbor who had called the factory a money pit asked Isaiah if he could inspect an old machine on his farm. Darnell stopped making jokes. Even the county inspector changed his mind. The demolition notice was canceled. The factory remained standing, but there was one person Isaiah wanted to show the basement to. His father. He couldn't. His father had died years earlier, so Isaiah did something else. He took the old notebook home. That evening he placed it on his father's workbench. The bench was still in Isaiah's garage, the same bench where his father had once taught him to weld. Isaiah opened the notebook to the sentence that had guided the entire investigation. First find out why it failed. He finally understood why his father had repeated those words so often. It wasn't really about machines. It was about people. About things that looked useless because nobody had taken the time to understand them. A broken machine. An old building. A forgotten skill. A person who had been dismissed too quickly. The following spring, Isaiah opened the factory to young mechanics and welders from the surrounding area. He didn't charge them to use the old equipment. He taught them how to repair before replacing, how to measure twice, how to listen to a machine before taking it apart. And above all, how to ask one question before assuming something was worthless. Why did it fail? The gray basement door remained. Isaiah never painted over it. He left the old scratches around the lock. He left the warning on the wall. Do not start the third one. But he added one line underneath it. In fresh white paint he wrote, "Understand it first." Years later, people in town still told the story differently. Some said Isaiah had discovered a secret machine. Others said he had found an underground factory. A few still insisted the old building had been hiding something dangerous. Isaiah never argued with them. He knew what had really happened. A forgotten engineer had built something ahead of its time. A company had abandoned it. A town had forgotten it. And decades later, a welder who was supposed to be foolish had simply been patient enough to look closer. The factory never became a fortune. Isaiah never became famous. He didn't need to. On most mornings, the old building looked ordinary. Sunlight came through the repaired windows. The welding tables stood where the rusted equipment had once been. A radio played quietly near the loading door. And underneath the floor, the old thermal chamber remained silent and stable. Sometimes Isaiah would walk down the stairs alone. He would stop beside Machine 3. He would look at the old gauge. Then he would look at Samuel Bell's handwriting on the wall. And for a moment, he would remember the first night he heard that tiny sound beneath the concrete. Tick. A sound everyone else would have ignored. A sound that had led him to a forgotten machine, a forgotten engineer, and an entire piece of history buried beneath a factory everyone had already decided was worthless. That was the part Isaiah never forgot. Sometimes the most important thing in front of you doesn't look important at all. Sometimes it looks like rust. Sometimes it looks like a locked door. And sometimes, before you throw something away, the smartest thing you can do is stop and listen. If you know someone who would have walked past that door without asking questions, send them this story. And if you were standing in Isaiah's place that first night, would you have opened the lock?